Hi, my name is Heather Kilner, and I live in Toronto. And I am reading Chapter 6, which talks about Jane in Toronto and her love of streetcars. And I live in the heart of Parkdale, right on Queen Street, and I have a streetcar running under my windows all the time. And I currently am in Sarnia, which is where I am from, and in my original bedroom, I found my original copy of Jane. And I hope you enjoy my reading. Thanks. Bye. Chapter 6, Part 1. It was a year now since Jane had learned that she had a father. A year in which Jane had just scraped by as far as her grade was concerned. Phyllis had taken the prize for general proficiency in her year, and did Jane hear of it? Had continued to be driven to and from St. Agatha's, had tried her best to like Phyllis, and had not made any great headway at it, had trysted with Jody in the backyard twilights, and had practiced her scales as faithfully as if she liked it. "Such a pity you are not fonder of music," said Grandmother, "but of course, how could you be?" It was not so much what Grandmother said as how she said it. She made wounds that rankled and festered. Jane was fond of music. She loved to listen to it. When Mr. Ransom, the musical boarder at 58, played on his violin in his room in the evenings, he never dreamed of the two enraptured listeners he had in the backyard cherry tree. Jane and Jody sat there, their hands clasped, their hearts filled with some nameless ecstasy. When winter came and the bedroom window was shut, Jane felt the loss keenly. The moon was her only escape then, and she slipped away to it oftener than ever, in long visitations of silence, which Grandmother called sulks. "She has a very sulky disposition," said Grandmother. "Oh, I don't think so," faltered Mother. The only time she ever dared to contradict Grandmother were in defense of Jane. "She's just rather sensitive." Sensitive! Grandmother laughed. Grandmother did not often laugh, which Jane thought was just as well. As for Aunt Gertrude, if she ever laughed or jested, it must have been so long ago that no one remembered it. Mother laughed when people were about, little tinkling laughs that Jane could never feel were real. No, there was not much real laughter at 60 Gay, though Jane, with her concealed gift for seeing the funny side of things, could have filled even that big house with laughter. But Jane had known very early that Grandmother resented laughter. Even Mary and Frank had to giggle very discreetly in the kitchen. Jane had shot up appallingly in that year. She was rather more angular and awkward. Her chin was square and cleft. "It gets more like his every day," she once heard her grandmother saying bitterly to Aunt Gertrude. Jane winced. In her bitter new wisdom, she suspected that his was her father's chin, and she straightway detested hers. Why couldn't it have been the pretty rounded one like her mother's? The year was uneventful. Jane would have called it monotonous if she had not yet been unacquainted with the word. There were only 3 things in it that made much impression on her: the incident of the kitten, the mysterious affair of Kenneth Howard's picture, and the unlucky recitation. Jane had picked up a kitten in the street. One afternoon, Frank had been in a big hurry to get somewhere on time for Grandmother and Mother, and he let Jane walk home from the beginning of Gay Street when he was bringing her from St. Agatha's. Jane walked along happily, savoring this rare moment of independence. It was very seldom she was allowed to walk anywhere alone, to walk anywhere at all indeed. And Jane loved walking. She would have liked to walk to and from St. Agatha's, or, since it really was too far, she would have liked to go by streetcar. Jane loved traveling on a streetcar. It was so fascinating to look at the people in it and speculate about them. Who was the lady with the lovely shimmering hair? What was the angry woman muttering to herself about? Did that little boy like having his mother clean his face with her handkerchief in public? Did that jolly-looking girl have trouble getting her grade? Did that man have a toothache, and did he ever look pleasant when he hadn't it? She would have liked to have known all about them and sympathize or rejoice as occasion required, but it was very seldom any resident of 60 Gay had a chance to go on a streetcar. There was always Frank with the limousine. Jane walked slowly to prolong the pleasure. It was a cold day in late autumn. It had been miserly of its light from the beginning, with a dim ghost of sun peering through the dull gray clouds, and now it was getting dark and spitting snow. The lights gleamed out. Even in the grim windows of Victorian Gay were abloom. Jane did not mind the bitter wind, But something else did. Jane heard the most pitiful, despairing little cry, and looked down to see the kitten huddled miserably against the iron fence. She bent and picked it up and held it against her face. The little creature, a handful of tiny bones in its fluffed-out Maltese fur, licked her cheek with an eager tongue. It was cold, starving, forsaken. Jane knew it did not belong to Gay Street. She could not leave it there to perish in the oncoming stormy night. "Goodness sake, Miss Victoria, wherever did you get that?" exclaimed Mary when Jane entered the kitchen. "You shouldn't have brought it in. You know your grandmother doesn't like cats. Your Aunt Gertrude got one once, but it clawed all the tassels off the furniture and it had to go. Better put that kitten out right now, Miss Victoria." Jane hated to be called Miss Victoria, but grandmother insisted on the servants addressing her so. "I can't put it out in the cold, Mary. Let me give it some supper and leave it here till after dinner. I'll ask grandmother to let me keep it. Perhaps she will if I promise to keep it out of hearing in the yard. You wouldn't mind it round, would you, Mary?" "I'd like it," said Mary. "I'd often thought a cat would be great company, or a dog. Your mother had a dog once, but it got poisoned, and she said she would never have another." Mary did not tell Jane that she firmly believed the old lady had poisoned the dog. You didn't tell children things like that, and anyway, she couldn't be dead sure of it. All she was sure of was that old Mrs. Kennedy had been bitterly jealous of her daughter's love for the dog. "How she used to look at it when she didn't know I saw her," thought Mary. Grandmother and Aunt Gertrude and Mother were taking in a couple of teas that day, so Jane knew she could count on at least an hour yet. It was a pleasant hour. The kitten was happy and frolicsome, having drunk milk, and its little sides tubbed out almost to the bursting point. The kitchen was warm and cozy. Mary let Jane chop nuts that were to be sprinkled over the cake, and cut pears into slim segments for the salad. "Oh, Mary, blueberry pie! Why don't we have it oftener? You make such delicious blueberry pie." "Well, there's some that can make pies and some who can't," said Mary complacently. "As for having it oftener, you know your grandmother doesn't care much for any kind of pie. She says they're indigestible. And my father lived to be 90 and had pie for breakfast every morning of his life. I just make it occasionally for your mother." "After dinner, I'll tell grandmother about the kitten and ask if I may keep it," said Jane. "I think you'll have your troubles for your pains, you poor child," Mary said as the door closed behind Jane. "Miss Robin ought to stand up for you more than she does. But there, she's always been under the thumbs of her mother. Anyway, I hope dinner will go well and keep the old dame in good humor. I wished I hadn't made that blueberry pie after all. It's lucky she won't know Miss Victoria fixed the salad. And what folks know never hurts them." The dinner did not go well. There was tension in the air. Grandmother did not talk. Evidently some occurrence of the afternoon had put her out. Aunt Gertrude never talked at any time. And Mother seemed uneasy and never once tried to pass Jane any of the little signals they had: the touched lip, the lifted eyebrow, the crooked finger, all that meant "honey darling," or "I love you," or "consider yourself kissed." Jane, burdened by her secret, was even more awkward than usual, and when she was eating her blueberry pie, she dropped a forkful of it on the table. "This," said Grandmother, "might have been excused in a child of 5. It is absolutely inexcusable in a girl of your age. Blueberry stains is almost impossible to get out, and this is one of my best tablecloths. But of course that is a matter of small importance." Jane gazed at the table in dismay. How such a little bit of pie could have spread itself over so much territory she could not understand. And of course it had to be at this inauspicious moment that a little furry creature escaped the pursuing Mary, skittered across the dining room, and bounded into Jane's lap. Jane's heart descended into her boots. "Where did that cat come from?" demanded Grandmother. "I mustn't be a coward," thought Jane desperately. "I found it on the street and brought it in," she said bravely. Defiantly, Grandmother thought. "It was so cold and hungry. Look how thin it is, Grandmother. Please may I keep it? It's such a darling. I won't let it trouble you. I'll—" "My dear Victoria, don't be ridiculous. I really suppose you know that we do not keep cats here. Be good enough to put that creature out at once." "Oh, no, not out in the street, Grandmother. Please, listen to the sleet. It would die." "I expect you to obey me without argument, Victoria. You cannot have your own way all the time. Other people's wishes must be considered occasionally. Please oblige me by making no further fuss over a trifle." "Grandmother," began Jane passionately, but Grandmother lifted a tiny, wrinkled, sparkling hand. Now, don't work yourself into a state, Victoria. Take that thing out at once." Jane took the kitten to the kitchen. "Don't worry, Miss Victoria. I'll get Frank to put it in the garage with a rug to lie on. It'll be quite comfy, and tomorrow I'll find it a good home for it at my sister's. She's fond of cats." Jane never cried, so she was not crying when Mother slipped rather stealthily into her room for a goodnight kiss. She was only tense with rebellion. "Mummy, I wish we could get away, just you and I. I hate this place, Mummy, I hate it." And Mother said a strange thing and said it bitterly. "There is no escape for either of us now." End of chapter 6.